Good afternoon, class. I hope that you're fine. Please confirm that you're able to hear me and you're able to see. Please confirm that you're able to hear and see. All right, then. We can then get started. At least someone has confirmed that they're able to hear and see. So if you cannot hear and see from your end, probably means that the problem is at your end. So look at it. Otherwise, everything else is fine. So I hope that you're fine from the last time that we met, that you've been keeping well. I wanted to continue from where we stopped last time so that we can have a productive time of learning. Let me share a screen here so that at least we can begin. I'm going to use this screen as my whiteboard. So I'm going to be writing things here as I explain, all right? So we want to look at data collection. Data collection is the topic where we are at. That's the topic we are dealing with from today. And it really flows very well with after sampling, because after you gather samples of people or samples of things that you want to study, then you can now study those samples or study from those samples, gather facts from those samples, all right? Like if you decided to choose a sample out of 1,000 students, you are doing a research probably on the impact of HIV and AIDS in campuses, let's say something like that. And of course, you have picked your sample of like 20 students or 50 students from the 1,050 students from the department. Do you remember the concept of source lists and those kinds of things? So you've decided to pick your samples, and you pick those samples, those people, those students, and you begin now to give them questionnaires so that they can now answer. What are you doing? You are basically gathering facts, okay, from the samples. You're gathering facts. So data collection is, we can say that data collection, for a definition, it is a process of, it's actually a rigorous process. It's a rigorous process of finding and gathering facts and information relevant to the subject of research. That's basically what data collection is. It's a rigorous process of finding and gathering facts and information relevant to the subject of research. Now, in data collection, there are two kinds of data that can be collected from two kinds of data sources. All right? Two kinds of data and data sources. So, let's discuss the two kinds of data and data sources. Number one, we have what we call primary data. Then we have secondary data. Now, what are these? Primary data and secondary data. Just a minute. All right. Primary data is data collected at the field and is wholly the work of the researcher. Primary data is data collected by field and is wholly the work of the researcher, for instance. And there are methods. So methods, we can actually now discuss methods of collecting primary data. Methods of collecting primary data. So we have use of questionnaires. interviews, observation, experimentation, field survey. So those are the methods of collecting primary data. Primary data is what you go out yourself as a researcher. You go out and gather. You go out and look for those kind of data. You go out and look for data yourself. Okay. For instance, if you go out with questionnaires and you go to ask people questions, you are gathering primary data. You are gathering data that is directly sourced from the field. Okay, you directly source it from the field together. Then we have secondary data. Secondary data, this is basically facts or information from other previous works of other researchers. From previous works of other researchers. Okay. So what are some of those sources? Sources of secondary data. We have journals, we have websites, we have books, biographies, autobiographies, right? Magazines, newspapers, diaries, etc. Secondary data is basically facts or information from previous works of other researchers. What that means is you do not go to the field to collect the data yourself. You just go and check out what other people have said about that subject before you. Okay, so this is what we are having: primary data and secondary data. Now let us look at let's begin with primary data. Let's begin with primary data. So primary data, again, we say that primary data is what? It's data collected at the field and is wholly the work of the researcher. So that is basically what primary data is. Okay, you go out to the field and you collect. Now, what are some of the benefits? Or even before we go to the benefits, let's first discuss the different kinds of methods one by one. Okay, one by one, and discuss the different kinds of method one by one. For instance, how do you collect primary data through questionnaires? Let's begin by discussing what? Questionnaires. Let's begin by discussing questionnaires. Questionnaire. Now, the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what is a questionnaire? Right? So a questionnaire is a document that contains questions which respondents are expected to fill. Right, so a questionnaire is a document that contains questions which respondents are expected to fill. So you write questions that are relevant to your research, that are relevant to your subject. You write questions that are relevant to your subject, and then you basically, that is now your questionnaire, and then you print out those questionnaires, or you can send them to respondents via email. And then they answer the questions, they fill the blank spaces, and they send them back to you. Now, there are two types of questionnaires. There is what we call closed questionnaires and open-ended questionnaires. Closed questionnaires and open-ended questionnaires. Those are the two kinds of questionnaires. Now, what is a closed questionnaire? A closed questionnaire is basically a questionnaire that contains, it's a questionnaire that contains definitive answers, from which a respondent can choose, So these are basically yes or no questions, true or false, or multi-choice questions, like the ones that we give you. We give you an exam, and in that exam, in section A, it contained multi-choice questions, true, false, and yes or no kind of questions. Those kinds of questions are called closed questions. What that means is that you are only limited. That's why it's called closed. You are limited to the answers which are provided, and you can only choose one of either of the ones that are given. That's why they are called closed questionnaires. All right. Now, why should we use closed questionnaires, or what are some of the advantages? Why should a researcher choose that when they are going to set the questions, they are going to set the answers already defined, such that the respondent can just tick or fill one of the ones that they feel is true, or it's relevant to that question. Why would a researcher choose closed questionnaire? There are particular advantages to this formalism. The first advantage is that easy for the respondent to fill. Easy for the respondent to fill, because you are just choosing, you're not writing down explanations. It's very easy for the respondent to fill. All right. But also it is also time effective for respondents. So respondents will not feel like you're wasting a lot of their time. Okay. So you give them questions that they can just choose the answers. Okay. Time effective for respondents, right? And it also allows you to analyze easy analysis. Easy analysis. Why is that? Because in analysis of data, you're trying to see what the respondents give, the kind of data that they responded, what were their specific answers, so that now you can generalize and see and say, out of 20 respondents, 18 answered the following, 2 said the following. That is very easy for yes or no, true or false, and multi-choice questions, because it is very easy to know the number of people who answered in a particular way, the number of people answered in a particular way, the number of people answered in a particular way. All right. For instance, if you have a question like in your questionnaire, you have a question like how easy or how effective are the library services of ZTech University. All right. So you would have choices like poor or very poor, moderate, good, very good, excellent. So basically, a respondent will just tick one of those. So easy analysis, because now you're going to pick the questionnaires afterwards, and then you look at them and you realize for a question number 1, 5 people answered excellent, 7 people answered good, and 8 people answered very good, and 2 people answered poor. Can you see that? So easy analysis, so that you can make inferences and conclusions very fast. Okay, so easy analysis. But then there are some disadvantages to this. The disadvantages of this kind of modality or formalism for questionnaires, using the closed questions, is that one is that lack of details, and lack of details may be challenging, especially if you are tackling a very rigorous subject. Okay, lack of details, because you won't have details. It's just yes or no. So if you're handling a very rigorous subject, a very, very probably tough or very involving subject, you will really have to settle on the answers they have given you: yes, no, true, false, or choose from the multi-choice. Okay, lack of details, especially if you're tackling a very rigorous subject. Also, it cannot be used. It cannot be used. It cannot be used when. It cannot be used when for a research subject. It cannot be used for a research subject that the researcher knows little or nothing about. Okay, it cannot be used for a subject that the researcher knows little or nothing about. Why? Because especially if you are using multi-choice questions, right? Especially multi-choice, how are you going to give people choice answers and you yourself do not know really what that subject is all about? Okay, you're also new, and that's why you are researching. You are new to the subject also. So if you are dealing with a subject which you probably can know the multi choices, you can know what to give the respondent so that they can give you answers. If you are familiar with that subject, then well and good. But if you are not very familiar with that subject, then yes or no questions may not be the best. Okay, you might need to have an open-ended where respondents can actually give you details. Okay, then there is open-ended questions. Now, what are open-ended questions? Open-ended questions are those that the respondent can give details. The respondent can give details. Okay, the respondent can give details by writing or typing their answers in a blank space provided. Blank space. So the respondent can give details, can give their answers, can give answers in detail. I think that would be more correct. Can give answers in detail. Answers in detail by writing or typing their answers in a blank space provided. Remember the section B questions in the exams that you did. In the section B, you were told you're given a question and then you're expected to type your answer in a blank space provided. All right. So that is basically an open-ended question. An open-ended. It's called open-ended because it creates some kind of liberty. Right? Some kind of liberty where the researcher, the respondent, can actually answer what they feel. All right, they can give details. All right. Now, what are some of the advantages of this? The advantages of this is that number one, you will get details, relevant details, especially for rigorous subjects. Especially for a rigorous subject, you will get a lot of relevant details because people are just writing, they're answering what they know. Okay, and then the other advantage is that it helps the researcher to feel the emotion of the respondent. It helps the researcher to feel the emotion of the respondent. It helps the researcher to feel the emotion of the respondent. So, when you are writing, when you're expressing yourself in a particular subject, you are able to, the researcher is able to know, or you the respondent, you are able to pour out what you want to really say in form of words. So me as a researcher, I can come by and read your questionnaires, the answers that you gave, the details that you wrote, and I can actually read the things that you are really emphasizing. Okay, things that really matter to you concerning that particular question I asked. Okay, so it helps the researcher to feel the emotion of the respondent. So open-ended has also some disadvantages. Okay, so some of the disadvantages of open-ended questions, it may take more time to analyze data. It may take more time to analyze data. Why is that so? It will take more time because you have to kind of sift. You have to sift all that information, like the way you would sift maize and remove the fiber. Yeah, you would have to sift all that information to really come out with what is what really matters. Okay, because you see, the respondents have given a lot of details, but you want to know what really is their answer, because some answers may not be straightforward. So you might be forced to really take a lot of time to analyze the data. Okay, so that's one of the disadvantages, and that's one of the disadvantages. I think it's a primary disadvantage. Okay, now I want us to look at how to prepare questions. How to prepare questions in a questionnaire. Let's just say the dynamics of questionnaires. The dynamics of questionnaires, right? The dynamics of questionnaires. And the first thing we're going to study is we're going to discuss two dynamics: how to set questions, and then two, how to prepare for administering questionnaires. So we're going to look at two dynamics: how to set questions and how to prepare for administering questionnaires. Now, let me just have that. Okay, so how do you set questions? Okay, how do you set questions? So this is the first thing. How do we set questions? Now, here we are going to look at the nature of questions that you need to set. The nature of questions. Okay? The nature of questions. So the nature of questions, we want to know what kind of questions can be said to be good questions for a questionnaire. All right, what are the characteristics of questions that you need to include? Now, questions in a questionnaire should be clear, all right, clear and unambiguous. Clear and unambiguous. What this means is that those questions should not be confusing. You should give questions that are very clear. The language is very clear. And also you should consider also the people you are approaching, the people that are giving you answers, so that you can give them questions that they can understand. Okay, those questions should be clear. They should be unambiguous. They should not be ambiguous. I should not read a question and then ask myself, well, what does the question say? No, I should read a question, and just by reading I can actually tell what the question is requiring me to answer. All right, very clear question. Okay, and clear questions are very much enhanced by having not too short and not too long questions. So that's another concept that actually makes questions to be clear and unambiguous. A question should not be too short or too long. Too short may not really tell the respondent what to answer, because it may not be detailed enough. Okay? But too long may also be too weary to read. Okay, it may be too weary to read, and also in the guise of trying to explain your question too much, you find that you make it unambiguous. You make it ambiguous. Okay, so it should be just a question that, for instance, a question can go like, which particular shelves in the library do you mostly visit? That question is not too short and it's not too long. Okay, and because of that, it is very clear and it is not ambiguous. All right, so you can actually know I'm being asked about shelves, and I'm being asked the one among the shelves that I mostly visit, and then I can write, right? So it becomes very easy to answer. Okay, so questions on a questionnaire, as you set the questions, make sure they are clear and unambiguous, and to achieve that, they should be not too short or not too long. Okay. And of course, here in clear and ambiguous, we say that you have to consider the language you're using. Okay? The language you're using. Anyway, going forward, the Your questions should also be precise or objective, okay? Meaning that a question should not beat around the bush, okay? It should be precise. I should be able to understand what I'm being asked. The other characteristic of a good questionnaire is that it has questions. It has questions that are not too many and not too few. The question should not be too many and the question should not be too few. Okay? Too many will increase your time of analysis. Not unless you're doing a very rigorous research. You should not have too many questions. 20, 15, that's okay, but you don't want to have 50 questions. That is too much. Also, it will be weary for the respondent to actually answer your questions. Okay, they may answer some and leave others. Answer the ones they feel more interested in and leave others. Hence, you will have incomplete data when analyzing. Okay. Also, it should not be too few. Why? Because too few questions may end up giving you data that is unreliable. So you need to cover every area of your research. Cover every area. If it is a research on the impact of COVID-19 on e-commerce, as you ask questions in that questionnaire, cover every area about that subject. All right? But ensure that you should kind of spread out the questions. For instance, if I'm setting an exam for you, this is what normally happens. I pick the questions, I pick the topics that I've taught you, and I pick questions from every topic, right? I pick questions. So I will not really put a lot of emphasis on chapter 1 or chapter 2 or some particular chapter. I will distribute the questions to cover the whole content. So if my research is the impact of COVID-19 on e-commerce, you're going to have questions that cover the whole content of research, okay, the whole subject, all right? And then also the other characteristic, and which is actually supposed to be the first one, is that the question should be relevant to the subject. The questions should be relevant to the subject. Don't ask questions that are outside the subject, because after all, the data that you gather there, how will it help you? How will that data help to inform you in that particular kind of subject? So you need to have questions that are directly relevant to the subject. Okay, and that connects very well with precise and objective. You should not beat around the bush. Okay, just ask questions that are really clear, and they are really relevant to the subject. They are things that are concerning the subject. Okay, so the question should be that way. Then how to prepare for administering questionnaires. Here we want to look at now the process of administering questionnaires. Okay, so the first thing is to determine the questions to ask. First of all, determine the questions to ask. Okay, then type the questions and order them well. Type the questions and order them well. Why are we talking about ordering questions? We are talking about ordering questions because you need to have those questions following each other in a manner in which one question is related to another, so that it even makes it easy for the respondent to actually answer. And that's what you normally do even when you set your exams. We normally ensure that if we are setting chain or block questions, one question is related to another. So it is very, very easy for the thought process, for your thought process. It makes your thought process to be even easier. Are we together? Makes your thought process to be easier. So it makes the work of the respondent easier. They can actually answer better and even more precisely because their thoughts have been arranged. Okay. So type the questions and order them well. Print the questions and pack them for delivery, or send them a soft copy. Depends on how you have agreed with the respondent. Okay, or send them a soft copy via email or otherwise. Okay. Send them a soft copy by email or otherwise. So you have now the question. So for instance, if it is printing, if you've printed, go to where respondents are. Go to where respondents are. I think these are mundane things, very, very normal things. Go to where respondents are and give them the questionnaires. Now, they're giving the questionnaires, the questionnaire leaves. Okay? Now, giving the questionnaires may involve some things here, because when it may be a questionnaire where you want people to really take time and answer. You want people to really take time, like you want them to sit down and you want communicated. Of course, you have to first communicate. Okay, so of course you have to give them, and they sit down and they begin to write. They begin to write down the answers, checking whatever, giving the answers. But then sometimes you may give them so that they can go fill and then bring them later when they are done, of course with a deadline. Okay, so it depends on whether you are working with a deadline for a future date or you are working with the current date. You've gone with the questionnaires, you give them as you had agreed, you are going to give them, they fill, and then they give them back to you the same day. Okay, you go with them for analysis. But some they can go with the questionnaires, stay with the questionnaires, and then probably come for them after a week. Okay, so depending on what time, the deadlines that is there, you can now receive back the questionnaires, and thank the respondents. Remember to thank the respondents. Okay, receive back the questionnaires and thank the respondents. Right. So that's how you, and now of course you can now analyze the data, and data analysis comes in the next chapter. Okay, when you're done with the chapter we are in of data collection. Okay, so that's basically how you handle questionnaires. Okay, now what are some of the advantages of questionnaires? Advantages of questionnaires. So basically, I'm using this as a whiteboard so that I can engage you in this particular discussion, so that you can actually follow it. Because if I read out to you, it will be kind of boring, and you may even sleep wherever you are. Yeah. So, advantages of questionnaires. What are some advantages of questionnaire? Probably we can have people that are contributing. We have Komora Bada, Brian Opio. Would you respond? You could probably unmute your mic. I have allowed you to unmute yourselves. So unmute yourself and let's discuss.
Would you come up again? I did not get that clearly.
Yes?
Please come up again. I didn't get that clearly.
Yes, I was asking the advantages of questionnaires, as you can see in the screen. What are some advantages of questionnaire? Using questionnaires for data collection. So Komora says the questionnaire leaves can be stored for future reference. Yes. So the questionnaires can be stored for future reference, and even if they are not physical leaves, even the soft copies, they can be kept for future reference. It is easy to construct. Someone says it is easy to construct. Let me see who this is. Washiri. Now, whether a questionnaire is easy to construct or not really depends on the questions and the nature of the subject. So that point is going to be relative. Okay, it's going to be relative to the kind of subject we are having. If it's a subject which you have never really delved into, it will be a subject you'll have to take a lot of time to set the questions. Okay, so that point is relevant. But thanks for contributing. Somebody else? Someone else? So Komara says the questionnaires can be kept for future reference. Musili says it is precise, thus focus on a subject. It's easy way to get answers. It is precise, thus focus on one subject. Basically, all kind of data collection methods, they should focus on one subject. So I would not say that that's an advantage, that's a requirement. It's not really an advantage, it's a requirement. So if we say it is precise, thus focus on one subject, all methods of data collection, they focus on one subject. So it's not really an advantage, it's a requirement. But thanks. Yes?
What if I say the respondent is able to answer the question without feeling intimidated by the questionnaire?
Without, can respond without doing what?
Feeling intimidated. There are some people who are afraid to answer directly.
So there is confidentiality, yes. That's how we can put it. There is confidentiality of responses. Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's what you meant.
Yes.
Yeah, confidentiality, because if I give you questionnaires to answer some questions, you can answer and you don't have to write your name. And also, if it is in a room, sometimes, like, if you don't want to keep people locked, you can give them the questionnaires, they answer and return. All right. So basically, you will not know who. You will not know who. You will not know who. Also, somebody may post the questionnaire, may send out the questionnaire. So you'll not really know who sent it. Right? So there's that confidentiality of responses. And then someone else says they give exact information. They give exact information if it's a what? If it's a closed questionnaire, okay? But if it's an open-ended questionnaire, they don't give exact information. We'll have to sift all the information to get to what the respondent is really saying, okay? Hope you get that. Then Patrick says it allows one to get feedback from a large audience. That is true. That is true. It allows one to get feedback from a large audience. That is true. You can reach many people as compared to interview where you may interview like 3 people in 1 hour or even 2 people in 1 hour. But when it is a questionnaire, you can give 100 people questionnaires to answer in 20 minutes and they give you back if there are few questions. All right. So you see that. So it allows one to get feedback from a large audience in a short time. In a short time. Thanks, Patrick, for that. Someone else? Someone else?